Story 8: The Cursed Bowl, Machu Picchu, Peru. High up in the Andes Mountains in Peru, a soldier walked briskly along the mountain path. He held a packet under his arm and had a worried look on his face. The rain was coming down harder than he had ever seen before. He didn't care. He had to meet the king. Dripping wet, he was shown into the king's chambers. He silently opened the packet and took out a bowl. Together, the king and the soldier walked out into the rain. They placed the bowl in a hole in the ground and covered the hole with stones. They had hoped the bowl would be safe there and would never be found again. Unfortunately, a few hundred years later, the bowl was found, and it would take all the skills of Lucy and Jonathan to return it to where it belonged. Meanwhile, in the present day, Lucy and Jonathan were back under the magic tree. They were discussing their adventures in Venice while having a picnic lunch under the tree. "It was so nice to meet Enzo in Venice and help him find the treasure," said Lucy. "Enzo and his grandfather were so happy that they found the treasure before they left Venice. They said the two of you were the best adventurers they had ever seen," said the magic tree. Lucy beamed with delight, and Jonathan cracked a smile briefly before continuing to chew a large mouthful of sandwich. "Are you ready for your next adventure?" asked the magic tree. "Yes!" shouted the siblings. Jonathan even put aside his picnic lunch, eager to find out where their next adventure would take them. "You are going to Peru. There is a girl named Maria who will meet you there and explain what your adventure is," said the magic tree. The siblings pulled the lower branch of the tree, stood back while the small door opened, and then entered the tree trunk. There, as expected, their adventure backpack was on the table. They put it on, closed their eyes, and when they opened it, they were in Peru. The air was crisp and clear, and they looked around in wonder. Lucy and Jonathan were in the center of a town square next to a fountain. Around the square were buildings, and beyond that, mountains. Standing, looking around, they didn't hear their names being called. When they eventually turned around, there was a girl with long black hair walking up to them. "Hola, I'm Maria. You must be Lucy and Jonathan. Welcome to Cusco, Peru," she said. "Thank you, Maria. We are excited to be here," replied Lucy. Maria reached into her pocket and gently pulled out a mouse. "This is my best friend Marco," she said, to the delight of Lucy and Jonathan. The three of them sat down on a nearby bench, and Maria started telling them the story of why the magic tree had sent them. A few days ago, Maria was in her attic when she found an old box full of books belonging to her great-grandfather. The box had not been opened for years. As she pulled out the dusty books, she found one that looked interesting. It was written by a man who traveled through Peru. The book was over 400 years old. Maria could barely contain her excitement at finding such an old book. She dusted off the cover and went to a window where the light was better. There she sat and read about the travels of this explorer as he explored Peru. He had traveled high up into the Andes mountain range that ran through Peru, and there he came upon the estate of an Inca king. It was called Machu Picchu. He was welcomed warmly and stayed there for many days and nights. On his last night, he was told the story of the cursed bowl. The Inca king had been given a beautiful bowl by his uncle as a gift. He kept the bowl by the side of his bed and drank water from it before going to sleep. His uncle told him to keep the bowl safe as it had magic powers and would bring happiness and prosperity to his kingdom. One night, after drinking the water from the bowl, he got a tummy ache. In a fit of anger, he ran out of the palace and threw the bowl over a cliff. When he woke up the next morning, he realized his mistake. The king immediately went and spoke to his uncle and told him what had happened. His uncle threw his arms up in despair. If the bowl was not used properly, then its magic would turn into a curse. The curse was that it would rain in the kingdom and the rain would not stop. There would be floods and all the crops would be destroyed. The only solution was to find the bowl and then bury it, and the curse would then go away. By then, it had started raining. The king knew he had to find the bowl quickly to stop the rain. He sent all his soldiers out, and eventually one of them found the bowl and brought it back. The king buried the bowl and the rain stopped. This was the story that I read in the traveler's book, said Maria. But if it ended well and the curse went away, then what is the problem? Asked Jonathan. The bowl has been found again. I read about it in the newspaper. Replied Maria. Machu Picchu is now a tourist site, and a boy was visiting. While there, he was playing with some rocks and uncovered the bowl. He took it to a museum. Oh no, exclaimed Lucy. Does that mean the curse has come back? I don't know about the curse, but what I do know is that after the boy found the bowl, the rain started in Machu Picchu and has not stopped for the last week, replied Maria. As soon as I read the book, I took it to the museum and said they need to return the bowl to Machu Picchu and bury it there. But no one believes me. We need to act fast, said Lucy. If we do not get the bowl back, and if the curse is true, then the rain will not stop. Yes, no one lives in Machu Picchu anymore, and the Inca estate is in ruins. But many tourists visit every year. If the rain continues, then everything will get ruined, said Maria, nervously clutching her hands. Let's get some lunch and we can plan our next moves, said Lucy. The three of them headed over to the nearby restaurant. Maria ordered for all of them so they could try the local Peruvian food. They tried the ceviche, which is fish with lime juice, salt, and chilies. This was followed by lomo salado, a stir-fried meat dish, and finally flan, a caramel custard for dessert. "Tell us about the Incas," said Lucy as she took another bite of the delicious meal in front of her. The Incas had an empire a few hundred years ago. It spread all over South America and was one of the largest empires in the world. They built large, well-planned cities that archaeologists are still uncovering, said Maria. They continued eating in silence, planning their next moves. "If no one at the museum believes you, then they will not give us the bowl, and we cannot get it back to Machu Picchu," said Lucy. "We need to have another plan." They finished their lunch and headed to the museum. Inside, Maria took them to the office of the museum director. He was not in, so they stood outside his office and peeked in. They saw the cursed bowl placed on his desk. It was a beautiful golden bowl that had silver rings around it. While they were looking at it, the museum director walked past them into his office and sat behind his desk. "Is it you again?" he asked, looking at Maria sternly. "I told you, there is no such thing as a curse, and we are certainly not going to give you this bowl just so that you can bury it in the ground again." They left the museum director's office, and as they walked away, a lady peeked around the corner. She motioned for Lucy, Jonathan, and Maria to follow her. They walked with her down the hallway. "I work here in the museum, and I believe you about the curse," she said. "We need to get the bowl back before the rain destroys everything in Machu Picchu." "But how do we do that if the museum director is not going to give us the bowl? He seems to want to keep the bowl," asked Lucy. "No, he doesn't. He is not even going to display the bowl in the museum. It is going to be locked up in the basement and will eventually be forgotten. They have many bowls like this over here. He doesn't want the bowl going back to Machu Picchu because he does not believe in the curse," said the lady. They stood around wondering what they could do. Then Jonathan had an idea and disappeared for a little while. When he returned, he was beaming at the plan he had formed. "Maria, I need 2 things. Can you please let me carry Marco the mouse for a little while? And I also need you and Lucy to distract the museum director," said Jonathan. The 3 of them followed Jonathan back to the museum director's office. They knocked on his door and entered. "Not you 3 again," he said grumpily, waving at them to leave. "We are not here to talk about the bowl. My friends are visiting, and I wanted to tell them a little about that building over there," she said, pointing to a building outside the window. "Can you please tell us what that building is?" The museum director got up and walked to the window, turning his back to Jonathan. "Which building? The one straight across?" he asked, peering out of the window. While he was looking out, Jonathan slowly crept towards the bowl on the table. Then, from his pocket, pulled out a small piece of cheese that he slipped under the bowl. From his other pocket, he pulled out Marco the mouse and left him on the table. Meanwhile, Lucy and Maria were standing by the museum director looking out of the window. "Yes, that's the building we were wondering about," said Lucy. That's a supermarket. It says so right on the sign, said the museum director, shaking his head. Ah, so that is what it is, replied Lucy. Maria nodded her head in agreement, clearly aware that this was a plan to distract the museum director. They then looked through the corner of their eyes to make sure Jonathan was done with his plan. He nodded at them. Excuse me, sir, but I think you have a problem, said Jonathan. The museum director turned away from the window, still looking confused as to why Lucy and Maria had asked him about a building that was obviously a supermarket. What's the problem? He asked. There is a mouse on your desk, replied Jonathan. They all looked, and sure enough, Marco the mouse was sniffing around the bowl. He had smelt the cheese that Jonathan had placed there. The museum director looked horrified. I don't like mice, he said. They scare me. Oh, no problem. I can take this mouse away, replied Jonathan as he scooped up Marco and put him back in his pocket. Thank you for your time, sir, he said, and began walking out of the room. Lucy and Maria followed him out. As they were about to exit the door, Jonathan casually turned to the museum director. Oh, I think the bowl you have on your table attracts mice. Did you see how this mouse was sniffing around? You had better get rid of that bowl, he said. Take it, just get the mouse out of here. I'm so scared of mice, he said. With that, Jonathan triumphantly went back to the desk, picked up the bowl, and smiling, walked out of the museum with Lucy and Maria. That was amazing, said Maria. Yeah, not too bad at all, said Lucy, quite proud of how quickly her little brother had come up with a plan. The three of them knew they had no time to lose, so they rushed through the streets of Cusco towards the train station. The streets were narrow and paved with cobblestones. Lucy and Jonathan looked around at the quaint, brightly colored houses, admiring the mountain views as they went. After a little while, Jonathan needed a break. I don't know why I'm so tired. We haven't been running for that long, he said, gasping for breath. That is because Cusco is high up in the mountains, and here the air has less oxygen. That is what makes you so tired. Let's take a break, said Maria. They sat beside the narrow road on an even narrower sidewalk. It was so narrow that people had to get onto the road to pass them. A street dog came and sat next to them, but there was no time to play. As soon as Jonathan felt better, they started heading to the railway station. This time they walked. At the station, Lucy opened the adventure backpack and, as expected, pulled out the packet of money the magic tree had left for them. She showed it to Jonathan. The money in Peru is called sol, she said, as she approached the counter to buy 3 tickets to Machu Picchu. The train ride was spectacular. They passed raging river mountains in the background and farmers tending their fields. The train was comfortable and had glass ceilings so they could see the sky above them. In a few hours, they reached the station. From here, they needed to take a bus up to the actual Machu Picchu site. They walked out of the station into heavy rain. They joined the other tourists onto the bus and were soon on their way. The bus made its way up the narrow, winding road, slowly taking turns. When they looked out of the window, they saw a steep drop going over the side of the road down the mountain. The bus dropped them off by the gates of the Machu Picchu site. The rain seemed to have gotten worse. They could not see too much in front of them. All the tourists decided to stay on the bus because of the heavy rain, but Lucy, Jonathan, and Maria jumped off. They started walking up the steep climb towards the site. They were soaked, but it was warm, so they were not cold. They slowly made their way up along the path, but could only see a little distance in front of them. "Where do we bury the bowl?" asked Lucy, shouting to be heard over the wind that had just picked up. "I saw in the newspaper that it was found below a large rock. I will recognize it when I see it," said Maria. They made their way along the path, leaning forward into the wind. Lucy turned around and looked at Jonathan. He waved at her and smiled. "This is what you call a real adventure," he said. Then the mist rolled in. It was as if they were walking into the clouds. They turned a corner and suddenly came face to face with a llama. Lucy and Jonathan had never seen one before, and they froze, not knowing what to do. "Don't worry, llamas are harmless. They won't hurt you," shouted Maria as she caught up to them. "We need to come up with a plan. We cannot see anything, so I won't know where to bury the bowl." They continued walking up. The path was getting more slushy and slippery. At one point, Jonathan slipped and fell backwards into a large puddle. It didn't stop him for long. He jumped back up and continued walking. Then they saw the llama again. It stopped, looked at them, and turned and walked a little distance. Then it stopped and looked at them again. "I think the llama wants us to follow it," said Lucy. "We don't know where we are going anyway since we cannot see anything, so let's follow the llama," replied Maria. They followed the llama for a little while, going higher and higher. Since they could not see anything beyond just a little bit in front of them, they didn't know where they were. Then Maria saw the outline of the rock. "There it is! That was the rock I saw in the newspaper," she shouted. They scrambled over to it and saw several smaller stones scattered on the ground and a small hole. The hole was filling with water but seemed quite deep. "That must be the hole in which we have to bury the bowl," exclaimed Lucy. They pulled the bowl out of the adventure backpack and slowly dropped it into the hole. There were piles of mud around them, and they started filling the hole with the mud. Then they started covering the hole with rocks. As they were finishing, and as they piled the last rock on top of the hole, the rain stopped. The sky started clearing, and the sun started peeking out behind the clouds. They took a step back. There, below them, was Machu Picchu in all its glory. It was beautiful. There were stone walls of old homes and terraces where they used to grow their crops, all with the background of the Andes Mountains. They stood and stared at it for some time until they heard the voices of tourists behind them. They turned, and there were large groups of people making their way up the path. They realized that they were so lucky to see this wondrous place without the hordes of tourists, even if it was just for a little while. It was time to go home. Lucy and Jonathan said goodbye to Maria and Marco the mouse, and then reached into the adventure backpack. As they had done several times before in their previous adventures, they pulled out the golden egg. They twisted the top of the egg, and when they opened their eyes, they were back in the forest under the magic tree. The end. Here are some fun facts about Peru. Peru is located in South America. Its capital is Lima. The symbol in the middle of the Peruvian flag has 3 images. On the top left is a vicuña, which is an animal related to the llama. The top right has a cinchona tree. The bottom features a cornucopia overflowing with gold coins. Machu Picchu is one of the 7 wonders of the world. To build Machu Picchu, hundreds of Incan workers pushed heavy rocks up the mountain. It is remarkable that no wheels were used. The national animal of Peru is the vicuña. And finally, a vicuña's wool is worth more than gold. During the Inca Empire, only royalty were permitted to wear it. That's it for this week. Don't forget to go to the menu so you can check out the written version of the story, as well as all the fun facts of the different countries that are covered in Lucy and Jonathan's adventures. See you next week.